Hey everybody, thank you for joining us again. We are going to be talking today about 1 Nephi chapter 3 verse 19. And behold, it is wisdom in God that we should obtain these records, that we may preserve unto our children the language of our fathers. Why did Lehi's family need the plates? We read that it's to preserve the language of the fathers, but I don't think it's what you think. We're going to get into it. Alright, first we need to know what was on the brass plates. The Book of Mormon tells us that the brass plates contain the first 5 books of Moses, a record of the Jews through Zedekiah, the genealogy of Joseph down to Lehi, and other books, including one referenced later, it's very important, the Book of Joseph, a record of Joseph that was sold into Egypt. So the first theory is to know their genealogy. There's a lot of very, very smart guys that are smarter than me, people that believe that they needed to know their genealogy. And this is true, but we're going to get into a little bit more details. I have a hard time believing that Lehi didn't know that he was from the tribe of Manasseh when he had a land of inheritance that was within the borders of the land of Manasseh. I would think that being not too far from removed from the northern kingdom, being scattered, he would have a pretty intimate knowledge of his genealogy. Another theory is that it was to preserve the Hebrew language, right? We just read in that verse that we may preserve unto our children the language of our fathers. What language did the fathers speak? It was Hebrew. So even Hugh Nibley mentions that this is what Lehi believed the reason they needed the plates is to preserve the language. But I have a hard time believing that because Lehi and Nephi were both bilingual at the very least, speaking Egyptian and Hebrew. They both wrote sophisticated parallelisms and Hebrew-style poetry. The whole Book of Mormon, especially the small plates, is littered with complex writing systems. These weren't guys that were illiterate. They were just trying to throw together a book. These are people that were very learned, very educated, especially in language and writing. And to think that they couldn't have easily just thrown together a Rosetta Stone type object in the time that it would have taken them to go all the way back to Jerusalem, risk their lives to get the plates and bring them back, possibly exposing their location and putting their entire family in jeopardy. That seems like a stretch to me, to think that they just needed a book, any book, to preserve the language. They wouldn't have even needed to go get the brass plates specifically. They could have grabbed another set of records. But they needed these brass plates for a specific reason. And obviously we read in this verse that we may preserve unto our children the language of our fathers. Well, for a second, let's think not in a Western context, but in a Middle Eastern context. Middle Eastern context that dates back to 600 BC. So in our minds, when we think fathers, often we think our father and his father and his father and his father. And those are our fathers. But in the Middle East, especially at 600 BC, when you refer to the fathers of an Israelite, the fathers are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, almost like to a patriotic American who says our founding fathers or the fathers of this country. The fathers of the Israelite nations are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In fact, go through the entire Old Testament and the Book of Mormon and look at the references, not where it says father, but just look up where it says fathers. And almost 80% of the time, Abraham is involved. So this, to me, is a reference to Father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what is the language that was used by the fathers? It was the covenants made, the Abrahamic covenant that was restored to Abraham and given to Isaac and Jacob and eventually Joseph. So what was that language? That it is my personal belief that in this verse they're not talking about the Hebrew language of their father and his father and his father and his father. They're talking about the exact phraseology, the exact words used in the covenant promises made by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to Joseph. So what are those promises that were made? They needed to know the exact wording. They needed to know exactly word for word that they were Israelite descendants and that these promises applied to them, and they needed to know exactly what those promises were if they were going to go forward. So the promises that were made, that their posterity would be numerous, that their seed or descendants would receive the gospel and bear the priesthood, that through the ministry of Abraham's seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed, even with the blessings of the gospel, which are the blessings of salvation and eternal life. And Joseph specifically, who is confirmed in the brass plates that Lehi is a descendant of, would inherit a promised land over the wall among the everlasting hills. So the promise that they got details about in the brass plates was that they would cross the ocean and inherit a land of everlasting hills, a promised land. Now, this must have given them final comfort and assurity that they can move forward on this journey where Sariah was questioning, Laman and Lemuel were questioning. Imagine their children and their children's children and their children's children and their children's children. If the immediate family has doubts, how quickly is that faith going to be lost if they don't have this record of these exact promises that they would receive through the lineage of Joseph, and to know exactly who they were, that they were the rightful heirs to these promises. Genesis 49:22, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over the wall. This references that the tribe of Joseph would be scattered and go over the ocean, the wall referring to the barrier between the Eastern world and the Western world. Once I understood this, so many passages in the Book of Mormon start to make sense. If you understand that the very nature of everything that they're doing inside the Book of Mormon is a fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant and the promises made to the tribe of Joseph, specifically through Manasseh and eventually through Ephraim, whom most of us are descendants of. This all started to click into place for me, and I started to understand this, and everything in the Book of Mormon started to make sense when I realized this. And then I went back and saw in the title page, when we think about the purpose of the Book of Mormon, we always think about where it says in the title page, to the convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself to all nations. But there is one other purpose to the Book of Mormon that is written in the line directly preceding that line. It says, which is to show unto the remnant of the house of Israel what great things the Lord hath done for their fathers, and they may know the covenants of the Lord, that they are not cast off forever. The exact reason they wrote the Book of Mormon for us is the exact reason they needed the brass plates for themselves, to know that they were a descendant of Joseph and a descendant of Abraham, an Israelite, and that the promised blessings that are associated with the Abrahamic covenant were promised blessings that were rightfully due to them if they were to keep their end of the covenant. By getting the brass plates, they fulfilled not only the actual proof that they were descendants of Abraham and Joseph, but they also preserved a detailed record of exactly what that covenant was so that they could keep their end of the covenant and expect those promised blessings were to come.